My name is Emma Johnson. I'm 32 years old, and I need to tell you about the day my mom ignored my wedding until I showed her what I had achieved. Picture this. You're standing at the altar, your heart is racing, you turn to look at the seats reserved for your family, and every single one of them is empty. That was my reality on what was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. While I was saying my vows to the man I loved, my mother was somewhere else, living her life like I didn't even exist. The pain of that moment broke something inside me, but it also lit a fire that would change everything. If you've ever felt invisible to someone who was supposed to love you unconditionally, hit that subscribe button and drop a like, because this story might just resonate with you more than you think. Have you ever been the forgotten one in your own family? But here's the thing. That empty chair wasn't just about one day. It was the culmination of years, decades even, of being second best, of being overlooked, of being told without words that I simply wasn't enough. My mom had this way of looking right through me, like I was a ghost in my own childhood home. Every achievement I ever had was met with a half smile and a, "That's nice, dear," while my brother got standing ovations for tying his shoes. I spent my entire life trying to understand what I did wrong, why I couldn't earn her love the same way he seemed to do it just by existing. And on my wedding day, when she chose to skip it entirely without even a phone call, without even a text message explaining why, that's when everything became crystal clear. You won't believe what happened next, because this isn't just a story about heartbreak. This is a story about what happens when you finally stop begging for crumbs of affection from someone who was never going to give you a full meal. This is about the moment I decided that her absence would be my greatest teacher, not my greatest wound. I'm going to take you through every step of my journey, from that devastating wedding day to the moment I stood in front of my mother years later, showing her exactly what she missed out on. So buckle up, because this gets intense, raw, and ultimately, incredibly empowering. Let me take you back to the beginning so you can understand the full weight of what that empty seat really meant. Growing up in the Johnson household meant living in a constant state of comparison and quiet rejection. My older brother, Michael, was the golden child. Everything he touched turned to gold in my mother's eyes, while everything I did seemed to disappoint her before I even finished. I remember bringing home straight A's in 5th grade, so proud and excited, practically running through the door to show her my report card. She glanced at it for maybe 3 seconds, nodded, and then immediately asked if Michael needed help with his science project. That moment right there, that was my childhood in a nutshell. Before we continue, I want to ask you something personal. Have you ever felt like you were competing for love that should have been freely given? Drop a like if this hits home, subscribe for more real stories like this, and let me know in the comments if you've ever felt this kind of pain, because you're not alone. The emotional toll of growing up feeling like an afterthought is something that shapes every part of who you become. I developed this people-pleasing personality where I would bend over backwards for anyone's approval, desperately seeking from strangers and friends what I could never get from my own mother. I changed my major in college 3 times, not because I didn't know what I wanted, but because I kept hoping one of those choices would finally make her proud of me. Pre-med, then business, then psychology, each time thinking maybe this would be the thing that made her see me. But every phone call home was the same, short, cold, filled with questions about Michael's new job or Michael's girlfriend or Michael's anything. I was just the voice on the other end, taking up her time until she could get back to what really mattered. By the time I met David, my now husband, I was so starved for genuine affection that his kindness felt like sunlight after years in a cave. He saw me, really saw me, in ways my mother never did. When I told him about my family dynamics, he couldn't believe it. He came from this warm, loving household where his parents celebrated both their kids equally, and the concept of a mother being indifferent to her own daughter was completely foreign to him. That's when I started to realize that maybe, just maybe, the problem wasn't me. Maybe I wasn't fundamentally unlovable. Maybe my mother's coldness was about her, not about my worth. But that realization didn't prepare me for what would happen on our wedding day, and it definitely didn't prepare me for the years of healing and transformation that would follow. Looking back at my childhood now, I can see so clearly how every interaction with my mother shaped the person I became, for better and for worse. I was always the kid standing on the sidelines at school events, scanning the crowd for her face, hoping this time she'd show up to watch me perform in the choir or accept my student council award. My dad tried his best to fill that gap, bless his heart, but even his presence couldn't erase the glaring absence of the one person whose validation I craved most. Michael never had to wonder if Mom would be there. She always was, front row, camera ready, beaming with pride. Meanwhile, I learned to smile through the disappointment, to pretend it didn't hurt when teachers asked where my mother was, to make excuses for her that I didn't even believe myself. If you've spent your childhood making yourself smaller just to avoid being a burden, please hit that like button and subscribe, because I want you to know your story matters. Have you ever wondered why you became the family peacekeeper when all you wanted was to be seen? The worst part about growing up this way wasn't the big moments she missed, though those hurt like hell. It was the tiny, everyday rejections that slowly chipped away at my sense of worth. I remember being 13 and learning to braid hair from YouTube videos because she was always too busy to teach me. I remember my 16th birthday when she forgot entirely and only remembered 3 days later when my dad mentioned it, offering a half-hearted, "Sorry, sweetie," that felt more obligatory than genuine. I taught myself how to do makeup, how to navigate heartbreak, how to handle bullies at school, all the things daughters usually learn from their mothers through late-night conversations and shared moments. Instead, I learned them alone in my bedroom, wondering what was so fundamentally wrong with me that even my own mother couldn't love me properly. By the time I graduated high school, I had built this protective wall around my heart, and my mother was permanently on the outside of it. I stopped trying to impress her, stopped seeking her approval, stopped hoping she'd suddenly wake up one day and realize she had a daughter worth knowing, or at least that's what I told myself. The truth is, deep down, there was still this wounded little girl inside me who desperately wanted her mom to show up, to care, to fight for a relationship with me. That little girl was the one who sent Mom the wedding invitation despite knowing better, who reserved that front row seat with a tiny glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, this would be the moment that changed everything. But spoiler alert, it wasn't. And what happened next taught me the hardest lesson of my entire life. The morning of my wedding day started like a dream, and I genuinely believed nothing could ruin it. David and I had planned everything perfectly. The venue was this gorgeous garden overlooking a lake, the flowers were in full bloom, and the weather was absolutely perfect. My bridesmaids were buzzing around me, helping with my dress. My makeup artist was putting the finishing touches on my face, and for a few blissful hours, I let myself believe that this day would be untouched by the usual family drama. I had called my mother 2 weeks before to confirm she was coming, and she'd said yes in that distant, vague way she always did, but I chose to believe her this time. I even picked out a special corsage for her, ivory roses with tiny pearls, imagining the moment I'd pin it on her dress and maybe, finally, see pride in her eyes. Now, if you've ever held on to hope for someone who repeatedly let you down, show this video some love with a like and subscribe for more raw, honest stories. Because I need to know, have you ever been stood up by someone who was supposed to love you unconditionally? As the ceremony time approached and guests started filling the seats, I kept glancing toward the entrance, watching for her. My dad, who had agreed to walk me down the aisle despite their divorce years ago, noticed my distraction and squeezed my hand reassuringly. "She'll be here, Emma," he said, though I could hear the doubt in his voice. We delayed the start by 15 minutes, then 20, with my wedding planner making excuses about waiting for a few more guests to arrive. I stood in the bridal suite, fully dressed, bouquet in hand, phone clutched in my other hand, checking for texts or missed calls. Nothing. Radio silence. Finally, David's mom came to find me, tears in her eyes, and said the words that shattered my carefully constructed hope. "Honey, I think we need to start. Everyone's waiting." That's when I knew. She wasn't coming, and she wasn't even going to call to explain why. Walking down that aisle with my father, trying to smile while my heart was breaking into 1,000 pieces, was the single hardest thing I'd ever done. Every step felt heavier than the last, and when I reached the spot where I could see the reserved family section, that empty seat with her name card on it felt like a spotlight pointing directly at my inadequacy. Michael had shown up, at least, sitting there uncomfortably in his suit, probably texting her asking where she was. David saw my face when I reached the altar, saw the tears I was fighting back, and he whispered, "I've got you. You're not alone." And in that moment, something shifted inside me. Yes, my mother's absence was devastating, but her empty chair also told me something I needed to hear. I was done waiting for her to show up. This was my day, my life, my future, and I was going to live it with or without her approval. But the real story, the one that changed everything, happened in the years after that wedding day. And trust me when I say you won't believe how this all comes full circle. The honeymoon was supposed to be this magical escape where I could forget about everything that happened on our wedding day. But honestly, I spent half of it crying in the hotel bathroom, while David pretended not to notice. I kept replaying that moment over and over in my head, walking down the aisle, seeing that empty seat, feeling like the universe was screaming that I wasn't worth showing up for. But somewhere between the beaches of Hawaii and our flight back home, something inside me just snapped in the best possible way. I realized I had spent 32 years of my life waiting for my mother to give me permission to feel worthy, and I was done. If you've ever reached that breaking point where you finally chose yourself over someone who never chose you, smash that like button and subscribe, because this is where my real journey begins. Have you ever had to walk away from someone you desperately wanted to stay? When we got back home, I made a decision that terrified me, but also felt incredibly liberating. I blocked my mother's number. I know that sounds dramatic, and trust me, I wrestled with that choice for weeks, but every time I saw her name on my phone, or worse, the absence of her name when I hoped she might reach out to apologize, it reopened the wound. David supported me completely, even though he came from a family where cutting off your mom was basically unthinkable. He held me while I ugly cried about it, reassuring me that choosing my mental health wasn't selfish, it was survival. I also started seeing a therapist, Dr. Patricia Chen, who specialized in family trauma and childhood rejection. Our first session, I couldn't even get through explaining my wedding day without breaking down. But she said something that stuck with me. Emma, you can't heal in the same environment that made you sick. That first year of no contact was harder than I ever imagined it would be. There were moments when I almost broke, like on Mother's Day when I saw everyone posting pictures with their moms, or when I had a bad day at work and instinctively wanted to call her before remembering that she was never the person who comforted me anyway. Michael called me a few times, saying Mom was confused about why I wasn't talking to her, which almost made me laugh because she'd spent my entire life not talking to me. But here's the thing. In that space where her rejection used to live, I started building something new. I started discovering who Emma Johnson actually was when she wasn't constantly performing for someone's approval. I took up painting, something I'd always wanted to try but thought was impractical. I invested in friendships with people who actually showed up for me. And most importantly, I started believing that maybe, just maybe, I was enough exactly as I was. But the real transformation was still ahead of me, and it would change everything. Learning to live without your mother's love when you've spent your whole life craving it is like learning to breathe underwater. It feels impossible until you figure out your own way to survive. The pain didn't just disappear because I blocked her number or started therapy. Some mornings I'd wake up with this heavy ache in my chest, mourning not the mother I had, but the mother I never got to have. Dr. Chen explained that I was grieving, and that grief is just as valid for living people as it is for those who've passed away. I was grieving the relationship we never had, the childhood I deserved but didn't get, the unconditional love that should have been my birthright, but was somehow always out of reach. If this resonates with you, please like this video and subscribe for more honest stories about healing, because I want to know, are you grieving someone who's still alive but emotionally gone? The hardest part wasn't even the sadness, though. It was the anger that came in waves so strong I didn't know what to do with it. I'd be grocery shopping and suddenly remember how she missed my high school graduation to go to some work conference, and I'd just stand there in the cereal aisle, furious and shaking. I'd be having a perfectly good day and then see a mother-daughter duo laughing together at a coffee shop, and I'd have to leave before I started crying in public. David learned to recognize when I was spiraling, and he'd just sit with me, not trying to fix it, just being present in a way my mother never was. My therapist taught me that anger is just pain wearing a different mask, and that I needed to let myself feel it fully instead of pushing it down like I'd done my entire childhood. So I started writing letters to my mother that I never sent, screaming into pillows, going for long runs where I'd let myself cry the entire time. But here's what nobody tells you about healing from parental rejection. It's not linear, and it doesn't happen on anyone else's timeline. Some days I felt strong and independent, like I'd finally broken free from her emotional prison. Other days I felt like that little girl again, desperately wanting her mom to just see her, to just care, to just try. About 18 months after the wedding, I had a major breakthrough in therapy when Dr. Chen asked me, "What would you tell that little girl if she was sitting here right now?" And without thinking, I said, I'd tell her that her mother's inability to love her was never about her worth. I'd tell her she's extraordinary and deserving and enough, and that one day she'll build a life so beautiful that she won't need her mother's validation to know it. That's when I realized I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was actually starting to build something real, something mine, something that would eventually show my mother exactly what she lost by never showing up. And that's when everything began to shift. About 2 years after my wedding, I decided to go back to school and pursue something I'd always been passionate about, but never had the courage to chase: architecture. I'd always loved designing spaces, sketching buildings, imagining how rooms could tell stories through their structure, but my mother had convinced me it was unrealistic and that I should pick something practical instead. So I'd spent years in a corporate job that paid the bills but slowly killed my soul, sitting in a gray cubicle doing work that meant nothing to me. But now, without her voice in my head telling me what I could or couldn't do, I felt this freedom to finally pursue what actually set my heart on fire. If you've ever given up on a dream because someone told you it wasn't good enough, hit that subscribe button and give this video a like, because I want to hear from you. What dream did you abandon that you wish you could chase again? Going back to school in my early 30s while working full-time and being a newlywed was absolutely insane, I'm not going to lie. There were nights when I'd be up until 3 in the morning working on design projects, surviving on coffee and sheer determination, wondering if I was completely out of my mind. David would find me passed out at the kitchen table with blueprints spread everywhere, and he'd gently wake me up and remind me that I was doing something incredible. My classmates were mostly fresh out of high school, and here I was, this older student who'd lived a whole different life before deciding to start over. But you know what? I'd never felt more alive. Every project I completed, every concept I mastered, every professor who praised my work, it was all building this foundation of self-worth that had nothing to do with my mother's approval. The turning point came during my second year when I entered a student design competition for a community center project. I poured my heart and soul into that design, creating this space that was all about bringing people together, about creating a place where everyone felt welcome and valued. Basically everything I'd never experienced in my own childhood home. When they announced that I'd won first place out of over 200 submissions, I literally burst into tears right there in the auditorium. For the first time in my entire life, I'd achieved something significant that was completely mine, something my mother had no part in and couldn't diminish. I called David immediately, and he screamed so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. That night, we celebrated with cheap champagne and takeout pizza, and I remember thinking, this is what pride feels like when it comes from within, not from someone else's validation. And this was just the beginning of what I was about to build. Winning that competition opened doors I never imagined would be available to me. I got an internship at one of the most prestigious architecture firms in the city, working alongside people whose names I'd only seen in design magazines. My supervisor, Marcus Webb, was this brilliant architect who saw something in my work and took me under his wing, mentoring me in ways my mother never did. He challenged me, pushed me to think bigger and bolder, but he also believed in me in a way that felt completely foreign and absolutely transformative. Before you keep watching, I need you to do something for me. If this story is inspiring you or making you reflect on your own journey, please subscribe and leave a like, and tell me in the comments, who was the person who believed in you when you didn't believe in yourself? The more I succeeded professionally, the more I realized how much of my life I'd spent making myself small to accommodate my mother's indifference. I'd been so busy trying to earn love from someone incapable of giving it that I'd never stopped to consider what I could accomplish if I channeled that energy into myself instead. Working at the firm taught me that I was actually really good at what I did. Not just adequate, not just acceptable, but genuinely talented. Clients requested me specifically for their projects. My designs started getting featured in local architecture blogs. Marcus told me that I had a gift for creating spaces that felt emotionally resonant, that told stories through structure and light. Every compliment felt surreal because for so long, I'd internalized my mother's message that I was fundamentally mediocre, fundamentally forgettable. About 3 years into my new career, something shifted in me that I can only describe as a complete awakening to my own power. I was standing in front of a newly completed building I'd helped design, a children's library with these huge windows that let natural light flood into every corner, with reading nooks built into the walls where kids could curl up and lose themselves in stories. I watched families walk in for the first time, saw kids' faces light up with wonder, and I thought, I built this. Not my mother, not my brother, not anyone who ever doubted me. Me. I, Emma Johnson, created something beautiful and meaningful that would impact people's lives for years to come. That moment of pure self-recognition, of finally seeing my own worth reflected back at me through my work, was more powerful than any approval my mother could have ever given me. And little did I know, this success was about to lead to a confrontation that would change everything between us forever. 4 years into my architecture career, I faced the biggest professional challenge of my life. I was given the opportunity to lead the design for a $50 million community arts center project, and I would be the youngest lead architect the firm had ever had. This wasn't just any project. It would be the centerpiece of the city's downtown revitalization effort, and every architectural firm in the region had competed for it. Marcus fought hard to get me this opportunity, believing I could handle it, but honestly, I was terrified. The old Emma, the one who grew up hearing she wasn't good enough, kept whispering that I was going to fail, that I was a fraud who'd somehow fooled everyone into thinking I was talented. If you've ever dealt with imposter syndrome while chasing your dreams, please subscribe and like this video. I need to know, have you ever felt like your success was just a mistake waiting to be discovered? The project was brutal from day one, testing every skill I'd developed and pushing me far beyond my comfort zone. I had a team of 12 people reporting to me, a board of directors scrutinizing every decision, and a budget that left zero room for error. There were nights when I'd come home and just collapse on the couch, too exhausted to even eat, wondering if I'd made a terrible mistake accepting this responsibility. The pressure triggered every insecurity my mother had planted in me, her voice echoing in my head saying I always bit off more than I could chew, that I never finished what I started, that I was destined to disappoint people. I had panic attacks in the office bathroom, moments where I seriously considered quitting and going back to being someone's assistant where the stakes weren't so high. David would hold me during these breakdowns, reminding me that this was exactly what my mother wanted, for me to believe I couldn't handle big things, to play small and safe forever. But here's what changed everything. I remembered that empty chair at my wedding, and I used it as fuel instead of letting it be my prison. Every time I wanted to quit, every time the project felt impossible, I'd think about my mother's indifference and channel that pain into determination. I worked harder than I'd ever worked in my life, staying late, studying every detail, collaborating with my team to solve problems that seemed unsolvable. When we hit a major setback 6 months in, the original construction materials we'd planned for were discontinued, threatening to derail the entire timeline. I didn't crumble. I pivoted, found innovative alternatives, and actually improved the design in the process. The board was impressed, my team rallied behind me, and slowly but surely, I started believing that maybe Marcus was right to give me this shot. That project became my proving ground, the place where I finally buried the version of myself that believed my mother's lies about who I was. And when it was finally complete, what happened next changed everything. The grand opening of the Riverside Arts Center was scheduled for a Saturday evening in late September, and it felt like the entire city showed up to celebrate. The building was beautiful, glass walls that reflected the sunset, open spaces designed to make art accessible to everyone, community rooms where kids from any background could take free classes. Standing there watching hundreds of people stream through doors I'd designed, touching walls I'd imagined, experiencing spaces I'd created, I felt something I'd never felt before, pure, undeniable pride in myself. The mayor gave a speech, thanking our firm and specifically mentioning me by name as the visionary behind the project, and the crowd erupted in applause. If you're still watching and this story is resonating with you, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button and drop a like, because I want to ask you something. When was the last time you gave yourself permission to be proud of what you've accomplished? But the real shock came about 2 hours into the celebration when Marcus pulled me aside with this weird look on his face, half amused and half uncomfortable. He told me that my mother was there, that she'd somehow heard about the opening and showed up, asking to speak with me. My heart literally stopped. I hadn't seen or spoken to her in nearly 5 years, and suddenly she was here, at my moment of triumph, wanting to insert herself into a success she'd had absolutely no part in creating. Part of me wanted to refuse, to have security escort her out, to protect the sanctity of this achievement from her toxicity. But another part of me, the part that had done years of therapy and healing, knew that this was the moment I'd been building toward without even realizing it. I needed to face her, not for her sake, but for mine. I found her standing near the main entrance, looking older and smaller than I remembered, clutching her purse with both hands like she was nervous. When she saw me, her face did this complicated thing, part pride, part regret, part confusion, like she couldn't quite figure out how her disappointing daughter had built something this magnificent. Before she could say anything, I spoke first, and my voice was steady and calm in a way I'd never managed with her before. I said, "I'm glad you came to see what I built without you." Those words hung in the air between us, not cruel, but absolutely honest, and I watched her face crumble as the weight of what she'd missed finally hit her. This wasn't the broken, desperate Emma she remembered. This was a woman who'd taken every ounce of her rejection and transformed it into something beautiful. And what happened in that conversation, well, that's where things got really interesting. My mother's first words to me after 5 years of silence were, "Emma, this is incredible. I had no idea you were doing all this." Her voice had this mixture of awe and almost confusion, like she couldn't reconcile the daughter she'd dismissed with the successful architect standing in front of her. I looked at her, really looked at her, and felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no sadness, no desperate need for her approval anymore. It was like looking at a stranger who happened to share my DNA. I asked her the question that had been burning in my mind since she showed up. "Why are you here?" She fumbled with her purse, avoiding eye contact, mumbling something about seeing the article in the newspaper and wanting to support me. I actually laughed at that word, support, because where was that support when I was 10 years old and needed help with my homework, or 17 and crying over my first heartbreak, or 30 years old walking down the aisle alone in my heart. If you've ever had to confront someone who hurt you after you've already healed, hit that like button and subscribe, because I need to know. What would you say to someone who suddenly wanted back in after missing everything that mattered? She tried to explain herself, throwing out excuses that sounded hollow even to her own ears. She said she'd been busy with Michael, that she didn't realize I needed her so much, that she thought I was fine on my own because I always seemed so independent. Each excuse felt like another small betrayal, because they all translated to the same thing. I wasn't important enough to prioritize. I let her talk, watching her squirm under the weight of her own justifications, and when she finally stopped, I said something I'd rehearsed 1,000 times in therapy, but never thought I'd actually get to say to her face. I told her that her absence had been the greatest gift she ever gave me, because it forced me to become the woman I was always meant to be, strong, capable, and completely whole without her validation. I watched her face go pale, saw tears start forming in her eyes, but I wasn't finished. I told her about the wedding day, about sitting in my bridal suite waiting for her while everyone else celebrated, about the empty chair with her name on it that haunted me for years. I told her about the therapy sessions where I cried so hard I couldn't breathe, about the nights I questioned my worth because my own mother couldn't be bothered to show up for the most important moments of my life. And then I told her about my awakening, about David, about architecture school, about this building we were standing in that represented everything I'd built from the ashes of her rejection. She tried to reach for my hand, probably expecting me to collapse into forgiveness and tears, to tell her it was all okay now. But I stepped back, creating physical distance that matched the emotional chasm between us. And I said the words that had been trapped in my throat for 32 years. I don't need you anymore, Mom. I needed you then, but I built a life without you, and I'm proud of it. The look on her face was pure devastation, and for the first time in my life, I didn't rush to comfort her or make her feel better. I just let her sit with the consequences of her choices. After that conversation with my mother at the Arts Center opening, I didn't see or hear from her for about 6 months, and honestly, I was okay with that. The confrontation had given me something I didn't even know I needed. Closure that came from me, not from her apology or recognition. I'd spent so many years imagining what I would say if I ever got the chance, and actually saying it felt like releasing a weight I'd been carrying since childhood. David asked me if I regretted being so harsh with her, and I told him the truth. Those weren't harsh words, they were honest ones, and I'd spent too much of my life softening my truth to make other people comfortable. Dr. Chen was proud of me in our next therapy session, saying I'd finally stopped seeking external validation and had given myself the acknowledgement I'd always deserved. Before we continue with the rest of this journey, I want to ask you something personal. If you could tell the person who hurt you most exactly how you feel with no consequences, what would you say? Drop a like, subscribe to hear more stories like this, and let me know in the comments what truth you've been holding back. The relationship with my mother after that night became something I never expected, civil but distant, like acquaintances who see each other at family gatherings but don't have real conversations. She reached out a few times through Michael, sending cards on my birthday and holidays, but they felt obligatory rather than genuine, like she was checking a box to ease her own guilt. I responded politely but never initiated contact, never pretended we had the mother-daughter relationship she'd failed to build when it actually mattered. Some people in my extended family thought I was being too hard on her, that I should forgive and forget because she's your mother, but those people didn't live my childhood, didn't sit through my therapy sessions, didn't watch me build myself from scratch after her rejection nearly destroyed me. I learned that forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation, and that you can release anger without welcoming someone back into your life who's proven they can't be trusted with your heart. The most surprising part of maintaining distance from my mother was discovering how much lighter I felt without the constant cycle of hope and disappointment. I stopped checking my phone hoping she'd text, stopped second-guessing my achievements wondering if they were good enough to earn her love, stopped shrinking myself to avoid her criticism because her opinion simply didn't matter to me anymore. My relationship with David grew stronger because I wasn't bringing unresolved mother wounds into our marriage, expecting him to fill holes only I could heal. My career flourished because I was designing for my own vision, not trying to prove anything to anyone. And most importantly, I started understanding what real, healthy love looked like. Unconditional, supportive, present, which made me realize that what my mother offered was never really love at all, just crumbs of attention when it was convenient for her. That realization was painful, but also incredibly freeing, and it set the stage for the final transformation that would define who I became. About a year after that confrontation with my mother, David and I found out we were expecting our first child, and suddenly everything shifted into an entirely new perspective. I was going to be a mother, and the weight of that responsibility terrified me in ways I hadn't anticipated. All I could think about was the cycle of rejection and emotional neglect that had defined my childhood, and I became obsessed with making sure I never, ever repeated those patterns with my own child. I spent countless nights lying awake, hand on my growing belly, promising this tiny person that they would always know they were loved, always know they mattered, always know that showing up was non-negotiable. If you're watching this and you've ever worried about becoming like the parent who hurt you, please hit that subscribe button and drop a like. Because I need to know, have you ever been scared that you'd repeat the same mistakes that wounded you? Breaking generational cycles isn't something that just happens automatically because you're aware of the problem. It takes intentional, conscious effort every single day to choose differently than what was modeled for you. I read every parenting book I could find, went to prenatal classes, and even started a new round of therapy specifically focused on preparing to be a mother without my own mother's influence. Dr. Chen helped me understand that awareness was my greatest tool. I knew exactly what damage looked like, which meant I could recognize it immediately and choose the opposite path. When our daughter Sophia was born, I held her in my arms and felt something I'd never experienced from my own mother: unconditional, overwhelming, fierce love that had nothing to do with achievement or behavior or anything except her existence. In that moment, I understood with crystal clarity that my mother's inability to love me was never about my worth. It was about her own brokenness that she'd never bothered to heal. The most powerful realization came about 6 months into motherhood when I was exhausted, covered in spit-up, running on 2 hours of sleep, and Sophia was crying for what felt like the 100th time that day. Even in that moment of complete overwhelm, I never once felt resentment toward her, never once wished she didn't exist, never once considered emotionally checking out. I picked her up, held her close, and soothed her because that's what mothers do. They show up, even when it's hard, even when they're tired, even when it's inconvenient. That's when I truly understood that my mother had choices every single day of my childhood, and she consistently chose not to show up for me. But I also understood that her choices were about her limitations, not my value, and by refusing to repeat those patterns with Sophia, I was finally, completely free from the cycle. I was building something new, something healthy, something that would give my daughter the childhood I never had. And that felt like the ultimate victory. Standing here today, 10 years after that empty chair at my wedding, I can honestly say that my mother's rejection was the catalyst for the most incredible transformation of my life. I'm now a partner at my architecture firm, designing buildings that bring communities together and create spaces where people feel valued and seen. I have a marriage built on genuine love and mutual respect, not on desperate need for validation. I have a daughter who will never question whether her mother loves her, who will grow up knowing that her worth is inherent and unconditional. And I have a sense of self that is unshakable, built not on anyone else's opinion of me, but on my own knowledge of who I am and what I'm capable of achieving. If you've made it this far in my story, I want you to do something for me. Hit that subscribe button, leave a like, and tell me in the comments, what would you tell your younger self who was waiting for someone's approval that never came? The relationship with my mother today remains distant and cordial, and I've made peace with that. She reaches out occasionally, sends birthday cards to Sophia, shows up to the occasional family holiday, but we'll never have the close, intimate relationship that I once desperately craved. And surprisingly, that doesn't hurt anymore. I've grieved what I never had. I've built what I needed on my own. And I've learned that you can acknowledge someone's place in your life without giving them power over your happiness. My mother's inability to love me properly taught me exactly how to love my own daughter fiercely and completely. Her absence taught me the importance of showing up. Her indifference taught me the value of genuine connection. Every wound she inflicted became a lesson in what not to do, and in that way, she inadvertently shaped me into the strong, compassionate, resilient woman I am today. To anyone watching this who's still waiting for a parent, a partner, a friend, or anyone else to finally see your worth, please hear me when I say this. Stop waiting. Your worth isn't determined by someone else's ability to recognize it. The person who can't see your value is missing out, not you. Take all that energy you've been pouring into earning someone's love and redirect it toward building the life you deserve. Go to therapy. Pursue your passion. Surround yourself with people who celebrate you. Build something so beautiful that you don't need anyone's validation to know it's magnificent. My mother missed my wedding, but she also missed watching me become successful, watching me become a mother, watching me become everything she never believed I could be. That's her loss, not mine. And if you take nothing else from my story, take this. The best revenge isn't proving them wrong. It's building a life so fulfilling that their opinion becomes completely irrelevant. You are worthy, you are enough, and you don't need anyone's permission to believe that. Now go out there and show the world and yourself exactly what you're capable of.